We're looking forward to your comments.
Daryl, thank you so very much. It's a great privilege and honor to be with you and to be working with you on arms control issues. For all of you that are there in the audience today, sorry I couldn't be with you, but this Zoom video seemed to be the modern, at least one of the more modern ways of communicating. I want to thank all of you for your efforts and for joining in this critical dialogue. In these unsettled times, events like this are really important because they provide a forum for honest discussion and for an opportunity to cut through the rhetoric of fear and doomsdaying that all too often pervades and occupies the nuclear policy discussion. Unfortunately, dispassionate, calm voices are regularly drowned out by the loudest and the most fearful voices. Last year, at this event, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan outlined 3 goals: prevent an arms race, reduce the risk of misperception and escalation, and ensure the safety and security of people from nuclear threats. He emphasized that an effective deterrence means that we have a better approach, not a more approach. Well, these are fine principles, but I'm concerned that in practice, we're moving towards more, not better. Instead of developing cost-effective systems that provide security while diffusing tensions, we've fallen into the fallacy that more missiles make us more secure. Nothing could be further from the truth. Well, it's well past time for the voices of restraint and risk reduction, to be heard in the nuclear arms debate. The United States, the Russian Federation, the People's Republic of China are now locked into an extraordinarily dangerous nuclear arms race. All 3 countries are rapidly increasing their nuclear firepower with new and more bombs, more long-range missiles, new stealth delivery systems, bombers, submarines, and all of this is totally dependent on the newest field of warfare, space. Yes, Star Wars is here today. All 3 countries depend upon their space assets to observe, detect threats, and communicate commands to act. Today, we must call out the failures of our current approach to nuclear modernization and demand that we treat arms control and de-escalation with the same dedication and focus that we give to our nuclear weapons development. It's long past time to develop a strategy that sets priorities, recognizes limitations, and strives for a safer future. Before I dive into the specifics of how Congress is approaching our nuclear weapons systems, I think it's important to step back and consider this in a broader context. Since their development 80 years ago, the destructive capabilities of nuclear weapons have terrified and shocked, but also led governments to pursue their own arsenals and develop the capacity to destroy our civilizations multiple times over. Governments justified the expanding stockpiles with convoluted theories of nuclear deterrence that all too often defied common sense. It wasn't until the arms control programs and treaties that were established that Russia and the United States de-escalated this spiral of stockpile bombs. For 4 decades, progress was made, and the number of deployed and existing nuclear bombs were reduced. And even the most adversarial countries agreed that a nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. Yet despite this understanding, we continue to maintain and modernize our arsenals with the belief that these weapons will dissuade others from employing theirs. The threat of nuclear conflict remains, and with it, life on our planet ending and becoming dramatically changed. It just occurred to me that it might be useful for meetings such as this to remind people of the arms control agreements and the leaders that negotiated them. I'm sure that some of my nuclear saber-rattling buddies in Congress would be surprised to find that their most ardent nuclear security heroes actually negotiated reductions and controls. Now, I recognize the nuclear threats posed by countries like North Korea, Russia, and China. I don't deny the challenging security environment that we face today. I am fully aware of the Taiwan-China threat, as well as China's military buildup and the South China Sea expansion. The North Korean regime is dangerous and could precipitate a conflict at any moment. I condemn Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine and its irresponsible nuclear saber-rattling and very dangerous nuclear exercises. Now, despite these serious threats, we must be wise in preparing our defense and response. Aggression should not be our first thought when we are faced with threats, uncertainty, and misunderstandings. Therefore, I strongly support efforts by the U.S. and Chinese governments to engage in meaningful dialogue that results in specific, concrete actions to reduce the risk of miscommunication or escalation. As we navigate these complex geopolitical landscapes, it's imperative that we pause and reflect on the strategies guiding our nuclear policy. Strategies must be more than a word thrown on top of some grandiose statement. True strategy is making the hard choices to align our country's limited resources with our unlimited aspirations. The greatest problem facing our nuclear strategy today is that we fail to realistically consider that balance and revisit our assumptions, adjust courses when programs fail, and figure out new paths going forward. Once approved, our weapon programs persist, even when they nearly double or triple in their budget. No one seems to say enough. Now, too often, we allow these debates to be driven by military calculations and experts who think they know how to fight a nuclear war. But we must not forget that in a democratic society, the military is the extension of the political and not the other way around. When it comes to programs and strategies that threaten our very existence, we as a whole society must decide what costs we should bear and what risks we must take. Our nuclear strategy must be balanced and rational, allowing for deterrence and defensive actions while encouraging collaboration for a more peaceful future. Now, we in Congress are very much a part of the problem. We have bought into the assumption that more nuclear weapons will make us safer. The ever-growing costs reflect the irrationality that has plagued our nuclear policy. In the name of modernization, we have taken on hundreds of billions of dollars of additional spending, and the nuclear counts grow without question or scrutiny. Let's consider for a moment the nuclear modernization efforts. The political price tag for the New START was to modernize all three legs of America's nuclear triad. Proponents told us that the multi-billion-dollar cost was absolutely necessary to assure that we would continue to have a viable deterrent, even though we would have fewer weapons. Now, we must fully understand the reasons for the massive growth and the cost of all these programs. If we were to turn to the new Sentinel ICBM, which is destined to replace the Minuteman III, it has incurred an egregious 37% cost overrun, making the program's costs almost 211% higher than the Air Force's initial 2015 estimate. This has triggered a critical Nunn-McCurdy cost overrun, forcing a stop and a full statutory review. Despite the new estimated cost of over $130 billion in the next decade or so, There are loud and clear reflexive signals that the Pentagon and Congress intend to plow ahead, no matter what the cost or the necessity. We hear always, well, we'll do whatever is necessary. No, wait, just a moment. What about the law? What about the Nunn-McCurdy law? Does the brass in the Pentagon and the leaders in Congress know that the law requires a complete and full review that address 5 critical steps? 1, is the program essential to national security? 2, are there no alternatives to the program which will provide the acceptable capability? 3, the new cost estimates have been determined to be reasonable. 4, the program is a higher priority than other programs whose funding will have to be reduced to cover the increased cost of the Sentinel. And 5, is the management structure is sufficient to control additional costs? Mr. Secretary Austin, you have to judge each of these 5 and then report to Congress about your decision. Now, it's not just the Pentagon's responsibility to conduct a thorough examination to assess the necessity and the feasibility. It is also Congress's responsibility to engage in a full debate to assess the Pentagon's rationale. Without public pressure, it's doubtful that any hearings will occur. And that's why our Congressional Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group will hold its own hearing on July 14th, and we invite all of you to join us at that hearing. Now, for years, Congress has dictated in the annual NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, that the U.S. maintain a minimum of 400 ICBMs. Why? Well, the answer seems to be, well, that's the number we've always had. Well, the number of ground-based ICBMs should not be set by the number of the existing concrete silos, but rather in an honest analysis of nuclear strategy. Such a review must consider the risks of a catastrophic mistake that is inherent in the Sentinel program. In the event of an attack, it is assumed that the first target is the well-known locations of the ICBMs, and therefore we find a use it or lose it situation, and the very dangerous launch on warning program. That is the operational imperative of the ICBM system. The president will have only a few moments to decide if the attack is real or if the alert is false. And the button would have to be pushed within 15 minutes or less. Now, if the nuclear program is for deterrence, then the submarines, the airplanes, and their missiles offer sufficient firepower to dissuade any adversary. These systems have the benefit of stealth, and more importantly, the president has the time to gather all the information and then decide to use the nuclear response. Now, if that weren't enough, we also have ample conventional weapons capable to deter potential adversaries. However, the Sentinel program is not the only problem. The hidden cost of the ground-based ICBM Sentinel modernization are found in unexpected and little noticed places, like the Energy and Water Appropriation Bill. Now, did you know that it appropriates $19.8 billion this coming year for weapons activities? That's a $2.7 billion increase from the previous year. So what's the $20 billion for? This year, the Department of Energy, National Nuclear Security Agency, NNSA, requested nearly a $3 billion down payment for modernization of the nuclear plutonium pit program. Now, these are the hollow plutonium shells that are used to trigger the nuclear reaction. On its own, this number is astonishingly high, but it doesn't even include the $8 billion to build the production facility at Los Alamos Laboratories and the second facility at Savannah River, which alone has a projected total project cost of somewhere between 18 and $25 billion. That's a six-fold increase from the initial planned construction. That will, if ever built, be the most expensive building in America. And oh, there's more. There's $1.4 billion request for the stockpile sustainment and $1.1 billion for a new Sentinel warhead to be developed at Lawrence Laboratory. Now that also has grown by 63%. And there are another untold costs associated with 6 other warhead and bombs that support the other nuclear modernization programs. Even proponents of modernizing nuclear programs should be concerned about these high costs. In January of 2023, the GAO report found that NNSA has not developed a comprehensive schedule of costs and has not identified all of the activities necessary or the milestones to achieve the required 80 pit per year production capacity. Now, did anybody ask, why do we need to produce 80 pits per year when America already has over 4,000 plutonium pits in storage? Has anyone studied the potential of repurposing those pits for new bombs? The bottom line is this. Senior officials at NNSA admit that they won't meet deadlines and they have no idea what the ultimate cost will be. Now, I proposed a simple, straightforward amendment that would change this law that requires 80 pits per year to a lower number that represents the realistic number of plutonium pits our country actually needs and can feasibly produce. To some of my colleagues, this seemed as an extreme, radical position, and my proposal was voted down. It's too bad that the Nunn-McCurdy law does not apply to the Department of Energy. Although I have included in this year's NDAA a requirement that the GAO review the feasibility of applying the Nunn-McCurdy law to the DOE and also reviewing the analysis done by the Department of Defense. Hopefully, it'll add more impetus for the department to do an honest and thorough analysis. Now, across the nuclear enterprise, costs are soaring, fears are growing, and it remains unclear what goals we're actually achieving. Amidst these soaring costs and escalating risks, it's imperative to reassess our nuclear priorities. Investing more of the modernization budget into diplomacy, into arms control, and into education could yield far-reaching benefits, fostering a stronger and more secure nation and world. Now, Congress must fulfill its duty to allocate taxpayer funds responsibly, avoiding excess expenses on wasteful nuclear programs, and do wasteful nuclear programs that do little to enhance genuine security. Now, maintaining a safe, secure, and effective deterrent does not necessitate all of these costly modernization plans, especially given the pressing needs in other critical areas to strengthen our nation and create world stability. The significance of arms control cannot be overstated. Prioritizing de-escalation isn't just an idealistic notion, it's a necessity. Arms races cannot be won. When we attempt to outpace our adversaries in weapon development, they inevitably respond in kind, draining their and our limited resources and fostering international instability as fear predominates and the world's most devastating weapons become a more likely option. The critical role of arms control in preserving global stability and security is evident from history's many, many close calls. We can't wait for another Cuban Missile Crisis to recognize the danger of miscommunication and failure to engage in a dialogue. Now, I know that many of you in this room have spent years drawing attention to the importance of arms control, and I am so grateful for your efforts. Like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill, I know that this is often a thankless work, fighting inclined for progress, only to see it roll back with the next administration. But the work you do cannot be more important. And unlike the Greek myth, I do believe that we can get that boulder to the top of the hill and develop a robust arms control regime that will help all of us avoid an existential threat. Now, there are three key pillars to this endeavor. First, sharing knowledge and fostering understanding are of paramount importance. There are some of you in this room that have written compelling arguments calling public attention to the danger of weapons. Thank you for doing so, and continue. Secondly, encouraging the dialogue and fostering open communications channels are essential. This meeting is one such example. The recent dialogues with China's political and military leaders, it's encouraging, and we should accept China's offer to discuss a no first use policy. We don't know where that discussion will lead, but it's an opening, and we would be foolish not to take advantage of that opening and follow it wherever it might lead. Lastly, garnering political support is crucial. Nonprofits and advocacy groups, you've laid the groundwork, and now we must amplify your efforts and call on Congress to act. For too long, our focus on arms control has waned, and members of Congress have paid too little focus and attention to it. Now, this is the moment to redouble our efforts. In a world marked by uncertainty and growing competition, it's time for bridge building, time for fostering understanding. It's more critical now than ever before. However, this effort will start here at home. Inevitably, we must reconcile our own infinite desires with our limited means. And that means making hard decisions about how and where we spend the taxpayer dollars. Can we make hard decisions? I believe we can, and I know we must. Billions of dollars have been spent in the last decade on weapons programs instead of finding paths to peace. It's well past the moment when we say enough. Now, together, we must confront the challenges before us, not by building ever more dangerous weapons, but by placing the same priority on effective arms control and risk reduction measures that we currently place on the nuclear modernization. We may face many challenges, but we still have the choice on which future we will pursue. We know the risks. We know the dangers that modernization and the inevitable arms race will hold. But that's why it's even more important that we redouble our efforts towards making de-escalation real. Let's take this moment, this opportunity, to engage in a meaningful dialogue and choose the path towards a safer and more secure world. Thank you for all of your efforts. I'm delighted to be able to join with you. Daryl, thank you for the opportunity. I'll be willing to take whatever questions they may come.
Great. Thank you, Congressman Garamendi. And once again, thank you for waking up on the early side and giving us that comprehensive assessment. I'm going to be asking my team to bring up questions from the audience. And that means, audience, you need to write your questions down and legibly, please. In the meantime, let me just ask you to talk a little bit more about the Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group that you co-chair. How did it get started? What are you and the other co-chairs and members of the working group trying to do?
Sure.
And and then in addition, what are the opportunities realistically for members of Congress, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to work more closely together on these issues, especially nuclear weapons, which affect everybody, whether we're in blue states, purple states, or red states?
Well, first to the Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group. Over the last several years, in conversations with many of my congressional colleagues, it became apparent that there were two things: one, an opportunity, and two, a problem. First, the problem was there was really no coordinated work or effort to deal with the extraordinary cost increases in the modernization program and the continuing decline of the treaties. And so 4 of us got together and started talking about what to do. Senator Markey, Senator Merkley, and on the Senate side, and then on the House side, Don Beyer and myself. And we said, well, let's work together. Pretty soon we had a title, Nuclear Weapons and Arms Control Working Group. We invited other members of Congress and the Senate to join us. Many have. There's probably 20, 25 active participants in our discussion. And there's others that probably another 100 or so that follow our work. Our goal is in our title: dealing with nuclear weapons, the modernization program specifically, and then promoting and encouraging arms control, specifically supporting the efforts by the administration in this arena of negotiation and dialogue. Now, with regard to all that's going on in Congress, the focus at the moment is the passage of the National Defense Authorization Act from the House of Representatives. Presumably, this will take place next week. We don't know if there will be amendments, and if there are, we don't know what amendments will be put in order by the Rules Committee. Hopefully, there will be 3, 4, 5 amendments dealing with the modernization program and amendments encouraging dialogue. We'll find out early next week. I think Monday, Tuesday of next week, Rules Committee will be taking up the rule for the National Defense Authorization Act. Hopefully they'll allow for the amendments that our team and others would like to put forward.
Great, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions here that pick up on your address. You mentioned that in addition to nuclear competition between the U.S., Russia, and China, they're also engaged in something of a space race because they're so dependent upon assets in space for the military activities. What are your thoughts about some of the recent concerns about Russia's activities, especially with respect to possible violations of the Outer Space Treaty? I would just note that our lunchtime speaker, Pranay Vadi, is likely to be able to offer some more insights on that. But from your perspective on the Armed Services Committee, I mean, what can Congress be doing and asking to help address those added risks in the strategic competition between these countries?
Well, clearly, it doesn't take much observation to know that the opportunity for dialogue between the United States and Russia is very, very little. But nonetheless, we should continue to pursue that. The unprovoked, grossly illegal, and horribly damaging Ukraine war brings all of us to attention. Attention that we are now faced with a very significant land war on the continent of Europe once again. All of us are aware that the 80th anniversary of D-Day is taking place in France as we speak. It's been a long time since there's been a major land war in Europe, but Russia has done that. It is essential, in my view, that the United States continue to support in every way Ukraine and NATO and the European Union as this war is pursued. A Ukraine failure is not an option. There's every reason to believe that Russia will move further west perhaps in some cases militarily, but certainly politically and with other methods to destroy the unity of NATO. And we see that happening with misinformation and in the political activities that are taking place in Europe today. So we have to continue to pursue that war. One of the sad and unfortunately serious problems created by my Republican colleagues was the 9-month delay in Congress providing additional support to Ukraine. It's absolutely clear that Ukraine was running out of ammunition, and thereby Russia was able to gain a tactical advantage that they are continuing to deploy today. And Russia is engaged in a very destructive campaign against the civilian populations and communities of Ukraine, all of which create a very dangerous situation in Europe. And as I said during my talk, Russia continues to rattle this nuclear saber. And that is reason for all of us to be concerned. Nevertheless, we're going to have to continue to pursue the support of Ukraine. I hope I answered the question. It was a little breakup as you were presenting the question, Daryl.
All right. Well, that's great, and that's more. And let me get to a couple other questions we have here. I'm going to ask you two of them coming from the floor. You spoke about the July 24th public hearing that the Nuclear Weapons Arms Control Working Group, your office, are putting together. I know that plans are still being made for that hearing, but tell us a little bit more about what it's going to be, where it might be held, what specifically you're trying to achieve. And then second, as you know, there are few opportunities and examples of bipartisanship in Congress, but one of them is the strong support for legislation to expand and extend the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, which was first passed in 1990 to deal with the toxic and dangerous and deadly legacy of nuclear testing, uranium mining, and more. But today is the expiration date for the current legislation. And if you could tell us your thoughts about the importance of that and what Congress needs to do, can do in the coming months on that subject.
Both of those are very, very good questions, Daryl. The July 24th hearing will be conducted by the working group. The purpose of it is to review the decision that will probably be made by that time by the Secretary of Defense as the Pentagon completes the required reviews, the non-McCurdy reviews that are required. Unfortunately, we had to call the hearing after, or it will probably be after the Secretary's decision. Nevertheless, we now are using the hearing as a way to review whatever the decision is and to let everybody at the Pentagon and in Congress know that at least somebody is paying attention to this issue. A much better situation would be for the House Arms Services Committee and the Senate Committee to conduct a full hearing before the Secretary's decision. Now, that's not likely to take place. It could be the appropriation committees, although once again, that's not likely to happen. And therefore, we're going to do this hearing on July 24th. We will have a series of individuals who are familiar with the Sentinel program, the details, the purpose, the goals of that program, as well as the current failures of the Sentinel program. and also looking at the options to the Sentinel program, and one of those options being the arms control option. I think I may have answered both questions. Hopefully I have.
No, the second question was about the Radiation Exposure
I see.
Compensation
I'm
Act.
sorry.
Yes.
This has to do with the radiation exposure. The nuclear testing that took place 50s, 60s, and into the 70s exposed military personnel as well as civilian populations in the Pacific and in the continental United States, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, to radiation from those tests. There's been an ongoing effort to make certain that that exposure and the health effects from that exposure were covered by medical and other compensation programs. Why this has been controversial, I don't understand, but nonetheless, it has been. There has been concluded negotiations with the governments in the Pacific Islands to provide compensation to the communities and to the individuals on those islands. Yes, you're correct. The expiration date is arriving. I don't have information on what is likely to happen. These pieces of legislation normally do not come from the Armed Services Committee. But nonetheless, I do know that many of us are engaged in and pushing it forward. I unfortunately don't have a specific answer on the odds of success in the next few days.
Thank you. I don't think anyone does except perhaps Speaker Johnson, who could schedule a hearing on the Senate bill that was passed with a large majority. So, Congressman, let me put one more question to you about some of the things you addressed in your speech. This comes from Sarah Salem from Exchange Monitor Publications. What are your plans to pursue possible amendments related to the Nunn-McCurdy review of Sentinel, as well as the beleaguered plutonium pit production program as the NDAA goes forward through the year? What more can you tell us about what the options are to help put things on a better course?
As I said a few moments ago, it's unclear how the Rules Committee will respond to the question of amendments. Presently, the Rules Committee has reviewed all proposed amendments before making a decision whether to allow them on the floor or not. Anybody that watches that Rules Committee knows there are two things. One, it's dysfunctional, and two, it is extraordinarily conservative. So it's not clear what amendments would be allowed. But the amendments that I and my colleagues of like mind would pursue deal with the Sentinel program, specifically requiring a complete, thorough discussion before any money is allocated to advance the Sentinel program. In other words, a full stop until Congress does its review and then makes a specific decision about whether and how to pursue the Sentinel program. And that involves, so we put some forth of an amendment forward that would cause that to happen. With regard to the pit production, it'll be a similar question. We also want to make sure that the GAO is specifically authorized to follow up on the decisions and the information generated by the Pentagon. We're doing that now. This speech is part of that to let the Pentagon know that somebody, if not Congress, at least the GAO, is going to review their work and hold them accountable for the fullness and completeness of their evaluation. Those are two that we'd be pursuing on the pit production. Efforts to limit the number of pits that are required should continue. Perhaps another amendment similar to what I proposed in committee that would eliminate the 80 pits per year. An analysis, but our analysis of the 80 pit per year requirement comes from a miscalculation by the proponents of the Sentinel program. They figured that they needed a new bomb, a complete new weapon, and therefore a complete new pit, and that it had to be 80 pits per year in order to get to 400. Well, if you're familiar with the Sentinel program, the warheads will be built and installed on the rockets year by year over a 15-year period. And you don't need 80 pits to accomplish that goal. You can accomplish that goal with far fewer pits produced each year. But there's a fundamental question that precedes all of that, and that's why are you building a new bomb anyway? The current bomb that is used on the Minuteman III or another series of bombs in our arsenal could be used. Now, if you're going to do a multiple warhead on the Sentinel, which is not what is currently planned, but if you were to do that, then you would need an increased production. As I said in my speech, we do have 4,000 pits in storage, and these were from the previously decommissioned nuclear weapons. Could those be reused? Possibly, but there never has been a study to even consider that possibility. So fundamental, do we need a new warhead? Big question, big expensive question. And if we have a new warhead, are we talking about one or more on the Sentinel? These are the reasons, these are the questions, and these are issues that the Congress must take up.
Thanks. I think we'd have time for just a couple more questions here, one of which I think is very important, coming from one of our younger attendees, which is that Alan from Trinity Washington University here in Washington asked, you're attempting to do a lot through legislation, but what recommendations do you have for young students or people who want to get involved to help reduce the nuclear risk? The other question has to do with what else can Congress do to help advance and build support for efforts for the diplomatic engagement that you were speaking about with respect to U.S. engagement on arms control diplomacy with Russia and with China. I just might remind everybody that Mr. Garamendi is a co-sponsor of H-Res Test 79, and there's a Senate companion, S563, along those lines. So, Congressman, your thoughts on those two issues, please.
Well, first of all, with community and individual involvement, absolutely essential. One of the key issues that I raised in my speech was the necessity of public involvement. There are numerous organizations far less active today than they were 20, 25 years ago, but numerous organizations around the nation that are concerned about the nuclear weapons issue. In those organizations are located in communities. It's easy to find them. You can always Google and then join those organizations and become part of the community dialogue that is essential. Invite members of Congress to those meetings if you already are participating in one of them. Don't let them simply skirt around this extraordinarily expensive issue and, in my view, extraordinarily dangerous issue. So that is simple political involvement and engagement at the local level, leading to congressional leading to those organizations then calling on the members of Congress in those communities to address this issue in a community forum. Always write letters, always show up in Congress, and specifically say, where's the hearing? What's going on with this? What's happening? These are not new issues. Well, you can join the Arms Control Association and become an active member in that association. So that's the community and engagement. And I would recommend people involve themselves directly with the members of Congress if they're interested in this. Show up at their local office and ask a question, ask for a meeting. If not with a member of Congress, then at least with the key staff person in those communities. All of this will create awareness and quite possibly sufficient political pressure to at least move this issue forward. With regard to the second part of the question about resolutions and the like, I would encourage other members of Congress that are either part of our working group or not to put forward their own resolution. The chances of any one of these becoming law probably slim, but nonetheless, the number of resolutions from different members of Congress, from different caucuses, from different parts of the country, all of those resolutions calling attention to the matter of arms control, of the continued nuclear buildup, the extraordinary cost of the Sentinel program, the danger of the Sentinel program, or any other of these nuclear modernization and arms control, put a resolution in. Maybe you're the only person on the title. That's okay. Maybe you got your seatmate that would want to join up. The more the better here. The number of resolutions from multiple areas of the country is important. I'm saying all this is appearing to focus on the House of Representatives. I believe I've used the word Congress here more than used the word House of Representatives. It involves senators. The two that are the co-chairs of the working group, Senator Warren is very active, as are Klobuchar and several other senators. Now, we do have a problem, and that is that the Senate Appropriation Committee wants to add another $50 billion to the nuclear arsenal issue, to the National Defense Authorization Act, and increase by a factor of 20% the number of Sentinel missiles. The rationale for this seems to be lost. Senator King, Senator Wicker are the principal proponents of that proposed increase that is now slated to be discussed in the Senate version of the NDAA.
Well, thank you for that last comment, because that tees up our next session, which is the short title is How Much is Enough? Key decisions, looming decisions on nuclear force size and budget that will be coming up. But first, I want to thank you, Congressman Garamendi, for your hard work, your energy, your leadership. It is impressive given all the other responsibilities and issues members of Congress like you have to deal with. Your energy to help reduce the nuclear threat and advance saner U.S. nuclear weapons policies. Let me invite our audience here to thank John Garamendi with a big round of applause.
And Daryl, thank you and your membership. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you and look forward to continuing to work with you and the Arms Control Association. Thank you very, very much.
Indeed.
Have a great day.
You too.